Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello Rank Squad and welcome to Ranks FC. It's your favourite transatlantic football podcast. My name's Jack Collins and I'll be your host today live from London and all the way across the water in San Diego. I'm joined by Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, mate. San Diego's beautiful. You got to come out here at some point, mate. I've got to show you around the gaff.
I'll go out to visit at some point. Once in a less busy year where I'm not
I think we can stick on expenses, mate. If we record one podcast.
We don't have any expenses. It's our company.
We'll get it written off. Be fine. Everything's good. It's funny, I keep getting messages like my mother-in-law lives in Michigan. And it's like, I don't know, -10 or something, like ridiculous. I was speaking to my mate yesterday, lives in Canada somewhere. He was even colder. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I've just put a sweatshirt on.
That's
as cold as it gets. That's cold as it gets. And even that I probably didn't even need. So yeah, mate, have I got a bit of a glow to me? I think I might have, you know.
Yeah, you're starting to become more tanned. It's coming across in these podcasts. We can see
it is actually. I think actually my New Year's resolution, delayed one, is to start wearing sunscreen on my face every day because I'm going to have all those sunspots creeping up soon.
You should do that anyway. It's good for you. Good
know.
Moisturiser.
I use a moisturiser. That's part of this glow, I think, that you can see, mate. I'm using a really good moisturiser.
I think what you should do is get a moisturiser with an SPF in it, and then you're cooking on both fronts.
You've been chatting to my sister again.
I have, yeah. That's me. That's the downer. Without you in the country, I've had to basically resort to other.
Oi, mate, you're getting married. Stop.
We've had to resort to talking to all the other Joneses in your absence. So that's where we've got to. I'm glad you're well. I'm glad it's sunny. We have seen the first sort of glimpses of maybe the start of maybe not spring. It's definitely not spring, but there's been some sun.
You've seen the
sun in London. So, that's all you can really ask for.
I'm pleased for you. I really am.
Those days are drawing out.
February was always my worst month in England.
February's my birthday, so I actually do quite like February. It's probably my favourite month. I'm a winter child, right? I actually do like it when it's dark and cold, but I do like having the sunshine. Bright and cold is my favourite combination of things.
Fair enough.
That's the weather I like the most, I think. Right, let's get stuck into this episode. We're going to talk a little bit later about some of the most disappointing clubs in Europe across this season. I'm going to split that. Dean's going to do some Premier League. I'm going to do some from the rest of Europe. So we're going to work through some contenders. But before we do that, Dean, it's time to talk about some things we love. What's on your agenda?
Oh, mate, all that's on my mind at the moment is Kylian Mbappé. The boy is back. Whoa. Like, that performance, particularly what he did in the first half against Las Palmas, like he was untouchable. I was like, I love to see this. It was brilliant. He should have had a hat-trick, obviously. Ended up just being the two. But yeah, it was just like when Mbappe's playing well because he looks like Thierry Henry. Like the way that he glides with the ball, the way that he sets the ball up to shoot, the way everything in his mannerisms and the way that he plays obviously has been compared 1,000 times to Thierry Henry, but I haven't really seen much of that, obviously, as he settles in at Real Madrid. And now he's settled. And it's right there. Like the way he was hitting a ball in this game, the way that he was feinting to pass and shooting, or vice versa. Nobody knew what he was doing next because he was just on a different level. And finally, we are seeing the real Kylian Mbappé for Real Madrid. So, yeah, a 4-1 win over Las Palmas. Obviously, slight concern that Las Palmas scored in about 30 seconds to take the lead there. Fabio Silva.
Forgotten man, Fabio Silva, yeah.
Fabio Silva could not believe. I've never seen a man so surprised to be celebrating a goal as Fabio Silva was running around the Bernabeu looking for people to jump on. But yeah, that was short-lived because Mbappé started to make his mark. And I just thought, mate, it was just a dazzling performance. I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I agree, actually. And I think it's very interesting that this felt like the most number 9 performance we've seen from him so far. One of the things that I thought was interesting about this Real Madrid performance, and I don't want to take anything away from them because I thought they were fundamentally excellent across the course of it, but it hasn't answered any of the questions. And I've seen this debate crop up now a couple of times across various bits and bobs, whether the Vinicius, Kylian, Mbappé thing can work in tandem still. And what I thought was intriguing about this was with Brahim Diaz on one side and Rodrigo on the other, Real Madrid looked like they worked so much harder in the middle there. Now, I think you can get away with Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. not necessarily doing the entire work rate thing for everybody else, and that's fine. But you do have to have 4 midfielders around them who are going to put in those hard yards. And I thought Ceballos was brilliant in this game. I thought the way that he controlled things in the middle. Now, let's not all get ahead of ourselves because it is Das Palmas, although credit where it's due. They gave Real Madrid a scare, obviously in the reverse fixture. I think it ended up being a draw. They've given scares to some big sides across the course of this season, and they're a well put together unit at the moment. So they deserve credit. But equally, I am intrigued to see what this looks like. We didn't see that defense tested all that much apart from that opening goal. And Real Madrid completely and utterly controlled the game. We're still obviously on the kind of hangover of that big loss to Barcelona. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the fact that where are Real Madrid when it comes to facing the biggest teams? And we won't get an answer to that really until we get either a couple of knockout games in the Champions League or that derby against Atleti, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. But I did think it was a move in the right direction. And I think you're right on the Mbappe part of it, where this felt like his most complete performance as a number 9. I thought Bellingham was excellent again, sort of knitting things together behind him. And the way that he just was able to drift around in those areas and link play up with everybody else felt like a real step forward. He's been very impressive over the last sort of 6 weeks or so. He won La Liga's Player of the Month in December. And I think that his step forward this season has been different, right? It's not the same kind of output that we're seeing from last year, but actually the way that he's controlling himself in the middle and what he's doing there is impressive in its own right. I'm intrigued to see how Real Madrid look going forward, but I do think it's going to be imperative that they have a player like Ceballos in there because it gives them an element of control that's perhaps been missing in a couple of the Real Madrid games this season, I would suggest. The thing that I loved most from this game was none of that, though. It was David Alaba coming back onto the pitch. What a lovely moment. Obviously, after a year out, nice. I'm really wary of this because I really don't want him to get injured again. And after such a long layoff, and with Real Madrid in such sort of defensive haphazardry, shall we say, I was worried that he was going to get forced back in before he was ready, but it was great to see him on a pitch again. What a lovely footballer.
Yeah, it definitely was. Proper returns here going on at Real Madrid. Just to touch on Mbappe just before you move on. I mean, Mbappe, he's got 12 goals now, but I was looking at...
he's the second top scorer in La Liga, isn't he?
And I was looking at some stats for Real Madrid players to see like how he compares to like the other front players and stuff. And like, in terms of shots on target, right, so far this season, you've got Endrick, who's had 4 shots on target. You've got Brahim Diaz, he's had 8 shots on target. Vinny Jr.'s got 14. So has Valverde, so has Rodrigo. Mbappe's had 42 shots on target. 42! He's only scored 12 of them. So something tells me that we're still getting a big haul from Mbappe because that doesn't seem right. Like,
no, but like we talked about this, one, on The Truth with Dougie and Sam, and 2, you and I earlier in the season, about the fact that he was shooting from weird places that don't feel like the Mbappe kind of angles, across his body when drifting out to the right. Those things are going to have to be addressed. He's going to have to learn if he's going to play through the middle. And look, again, this was a very impressive performance in that role. If he is going to play through there, you do have to open up your shot variation. You can't curl in from that left-hand side and score every goal in the same kind of manner. But I think that will improve.
Arjen Robben would disagree.
Well, Arjen Robben was not playing as a number 9. And that's probably why Arjen Robben never played as a number 9, right? Like, because his shot selection and variation was, slightly one-dimensional, if absolutely brilliant. So if Mbappe is going to play that central role, he needs to improve on his kind of shot variation and striking from different angles and taking shots from different opportunities. But that's something he's going to learn because he hasn't played all that much in this role. And it's something that, in the past, he's talked about not liking because he doesn't get to play in his kind of favoured pocket to take those shots. But that's going to have to be something that we see changing. And I think that it will as we go throughout this season.
Yeah, definitely. So Real Madrid now top of La Liga. They've got 2-point lead on Atleti, and Barcelona 7 points back now, all having played 20 games. So, it's still going to be topsy-turvy, but Barcelona, that was a big blow for them at the weekend, and this league is going to really be one to watch in this second half of the season. It's going to be tasty.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens throughout the rest of this campaign. I just wanted to take us slightly south of the border from there to Portugal. And this isn't necessarily something I love, but just something I thought was really, really interesting.
Right.
Is that Porto sacked their manager, Vitor Bruno, after a very, very disheartening loss to Gil Vicente at the weekend. And it's 3 losses in a row for Porto, who have had a really weird season, very, very up and down across the course of it. They've not been brilliant in the Europa League, which was a competition that I thought that they might well have been able to win this season. They're only 4 points back from Sporting, but their sacking of their manager meant it's the first time in history that all 3 of Portugal's big 3, Sporting, Benfica and Porto, have all changed their manager in the same season. Because obviously Amorim went off to Manchester United.
First time ever.
First time ever. Benfica sacked Roger Schmidt earlier in the season and Bruno Lage came in. They're 3 points back from Sporting, who still lead the league table. And then Porto, sacking Vitor Bruno. Some of the names being lined up as potential replacements are incredibly interesting.
Okay.
So Paulo Fonseca is in that list, as you would expect. He started his career managing Porto. Now, that didn't go particularly well, although it wasn't absolutely dreadful either. But he has matured quite a lot as a manager since then. And even though it didn't work out at Milan, I think there are reasons for that. And I'm intrigued. If we ended up with Fonseca managing Milan and Conceição, Fonseca managing Porto and Conceição managing Milan, we've basically done a swap, which is quite weird in some ways. But I think that's a possibility. The other one is being thrown around is Xavi Hernandez, which is really interesting, I think, as a kind of position where he might end up going and somewhere that he could maybe kind of rebuild is the wrong word, because I don't think that ultimately he, fell away at Barcelona in the same way. I don't think it was like a sense that Xavi Hernandez completely and utterly lost it. But I think that there is a sense that he needs to be smart with his next move at this point. And when you're kind of looking at what's going on with that, the reason he's being linked with this is because Porto's sporting director is Andoni Zubizarreta, who was basically in charge of the whole La Masia setup as he was coming through Xavi. And so there is this link there that's now going on. Now, there's a bit of a link here going on in general between Porto and Barcelona. It's not something that we're seeing for the first time. But, obviously someone like Nico Gonzalez came out of La Masia and ended up at Porto. I wonder if this is the kind of job that Xavi actually might take on and actually would allow him to rebuild his reputation at a team that is big enough to justify having a Xavi Hernandez at the helm, but also maybe where there isn't the same kind of pressure that he faced at Barcelona.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an interesting one. He's obviously been linked with quite a few clubs now. There's even some links to like Man United and stuff, wasn't there, at one point? But it's about finding that right club. I think this would seem pretty sensible. This is a good level because you've got the clout, but you've also really got to show that tactical nous in this league, and that's a good combination. It's a great stepping stone because if it goes well, you can go anywhere, obviously, as we've seen in the past. So, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think it's the most interesting of the options out there. Daniel Saus is being put around as well, but considering he's been sacked from both Vitoria and Braga this season, I think that Porto going there might be a step in the wrong direction, although he is good friends with Villas-Boas, who is obviously now the president of Porto because he started off as one of his analysts. So we'll see how that one might develop. But I really do like that Xavi Hernandez link, and I think it would be very interesting if he were to end up in
good profile
Porto.
too for the league, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be a big name, a big coup. And I think Porto need a shot in the arm because there was a lot of excitement about the Villas-Boas presidency coming in and kind of taking over from what had been a long, long regime before he won that election. But actually, considering Vitor Bruno went in there, the whole mess with Conceição and him and Bruno taking shots at each other on social media and basically Conceição saying he was betrayed by his former right-hand man, it's all been very dramatic and it's not been a particularly great season. So I think a shot in the arm, bringing in a name like Xavi would would do wonders for a lot of Porto fans. So yeah, one to keep an eye on, but we'll report back if that happens to be the case. Right, so we'll take a break there. Afterwards, we're going to be talking about some disappointing teams this season. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Ranks FC, where it's time for us to talk about some of the teams who have disappointed us over the course of this campaign so far. Dean, I'm going to hand to you in this segment, and you're going to walk us through 3 of the teams in the Premier League.
Yeah, so the reason we're doing this episode particularly now is that obviously on the back of Ruben Amorim, who has tried to rattle everybody inside and outside of the football club by referring to United as one of the worst Man United teams in the history of the football club. A particularly interesting take because nobody had ever actually asked him, as far as I know, whether that was the case. He's kind of offered this up himself. Whether the Man United global marketing team decide to take this on as a slogan is debatable, but
probably not.
He's in charge of one of the worst versions of Man United we've ever seen. I mean, I'm sure Ruben Amorim wasn't watching Man United in the 80s and early 90s when they were definitely worse than this. But I take his point, like this team are not good. Now, Amorim's quite a well-spoken guy. I think whenever you see an interview with him, he's pretty level-headed. He's very articulate. But he's trying to shock this Man United team. He's trying to look for reactions. And I think just trying to I read one of the United reporters say he generally after games, even defeats, he's a man of few words and he kind of just lets everybody sit on it and he'll talk about it later on. But don't think it's really worked. So he's now getting a bit of the Fergusons about him where he's trying to dish out the hairdryer treatment and kind of shock people with his words, which could work. You know, this team needs a shock in some way or other. I mean, by all accounts, he even managed to smash a TV in the wake of their defeat to Brighton. So he's quite literally smashing the place up as he tries to wake up his set of players. So it got me thinking of the most disappointing teams across this season. And I mean, I'm leaving Man United out of the ranking, to be honest, because they are the most disappointing team in world football at the moment. They are the biggest underachievers. When you consider the size of the club, probably, if not close to being the best supported club in the world. They spent huge sums of money. They've gone and got a new manager. They always expect success on some level. Their team is dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. The back-to-back performances against Southampton and Brighton were as poor as you'll see from any team at home across this Premier League season. So on the back of that, I'm taking United out of the ranking because they would be number one. We could be here all day talking about them. Look, we also did that recent podcast where we talked about teams that need to win the transfer window, and we spoke a lot about United there too. So I just thought we'd set this out talking about Man United are kind of the bar. They are bad. But other teams are bad too. Man United 13th in the Premier League now. 24 points off of top placed Liverpool. I mean, that is bad when you've only played 22 games. So yeah, that's that. Before I get onto the list, I just want to tell you the sort of things I'm considering here. It's pre-season expectations, current position, but also how have they performed in big games and what's their managerial situation been throughout this. So I think you have to bear in mind, have they actually tried to address this? Have they changed manager? Did they not address it properly? Was the manager never going to lose their job in the first place? And all of these sort of factors. So I've tried to kind of factor all of that in. And to move on to the list, at number 3, I am going with West Ham. Okay. Now, this has been a bad season for West Ham. They are currently sandwiched between Man United and Tottenham.
Which sounds like a good thing at the start of the year.
Yeah, exactly that. And you'd think, oh, that's fine. We're on course to kind of end up where we were supposed to be. But obviously with United and Tottenham being two teams that you absolutely don't want to be near at any stage of the season at the moment, it tells you that this is not going very well for West Ham. Now, obviously, they have paid the price for the appointment of Lopetegui, J-Lo, and then sticking with him for too long as well. It was very clear that he was not a good fit for the squad of players they already had, and then even some that they brought in, he ended up having really fractious relationships with that didn't help. He was not willing to change his methods of management, and he was not willing to change his tactics. You flagged this up almost from day one, saying he's not good enough. This is not the man that you want because he's too negative. And you're right, they've just been poor across this season. I mean, the City banged 4 against them. Liverpool have twice scored 5 against them. Arsenal scored 5. Forest have scored a few. Tottenham scored, I think, 4 or 3. I mean, Chelsea got a few against them.
Yeah, they've been hammered a lot.
Yeah, they don't just lose. They get battered. And for a fan base, when you're turning up for games and half the time you're getting absolutely slammed, really, really difficult to take. And the reason I'm including them in this too is because this is such a far cry from what I was hearing in pre-season from West Ham fans in their expectations and predictions. I actually remember really clearly in the week leading up to the season, listening to a West Ham podcast, and everyone that was on the podcast debating how high they could finish. And basically the debate was, will they make the Champions League or will they have to settle for one of the other European places? Like, it wasn't even like, will we manage to make Europe? It was like, with this squad and with Lopetegui, like, we're built for Europe. And obviously, like, West Ham fans have been losing their minds with what they've actually been watching. I mean, I know loads of West Ham fans actually just stopped wanting to go or did stop going because it was so boring to go and watch their team. They lost all identity, all that. You're supposed to be a bit scared to play against West Ham, particularly at their stadium. And that just hasn't been the case at all. I mean, they're a long way off making the top 6 at the moment, like literally 12 points away from being able to make that top 6. They're not going to make it unless Graham Potter can spark some crazy form of life into them. So I think they'll be as disappointed as anyone in Europe with how things have gone. But more than that, also they're furious with David Sullivan for firstly sticking with the manager as long as he did, but secondly being so slow in the transfer market to react. Now, obviously, part of the reason they're slow in the transfer market is because they were waiting to change managers. But even when they do show some intent in the transfer window, it's so unconvincing. Did David Sullivan really try to sign John Duran? Did he really think that he was going to get Duran out of Aston Villa? Because he wasn't. Because Duran's price was £60 million. He touched base, first of all, with £40 million offer, which is embarrassing. And he goes back in with a take it or leave it 57 million. It's not enough, mate. And now the problem on the back of that is West Ham fans are like, cool, so we've got 57 million to spend, have we? That'll be handy because we need that to spend on at least 2 other players. I don't know if they're going to go and do that. Potter's got a real job on his hands here to restore some respect to the club. Their next 4 games include 3 London derbies and a tough game at Villa this Sunday. So I think there's a possibility that West Ham even sink further before they can even swim again here.
West Ham had 5 London derbies in 6 games because they've just played Fulham and Palace. That's wild.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Their next matches, they've got Aston Villa. Yeah. Then they've got Chelsea, Brentford and Arsenal. Huh. So yeah, pretty wild. Let's see what happens. I mean, they're not easy matches. But so far, so disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's no way around the idea that this season has just been a huge disappointment from kind of start to finish. And you're right. Look, we talk about this sometimes. It didn't make it the wrong decision to move on from David Moyes. That felt like maybe it had run its course. As brilliant as he was, and as much credit is due to him for what he achieved, I do think that maybe it was time to move on for West Ham. But it just felt like the wrong decision from the outset. It felt like they were looking at a list of targets, and then someone went, "Oh, by the way, the Pettigew's free." They're like, "Oh, maybe that's interesting," and just backed it and went with it. And I just don't really understand at what point no one sat up and went, "Are we sure about this? Are we sure that this
Trust
is
me,
the person?
Not everyone wanted him. That's for sure.
But I didn't
Some
get
of
it at
them
the
wasn't
time.
even sure.
I don't get it now. I'm just very, very, very baffled by pretty much everything that's gone in, especially with the business that they did in the summer. And look, they spent a lot of money. The squad still feels uber thin, which is really bizarre, considering that they brought in a lot of players and a lot of quality transfers. There were some of them that you question. The idea that they were looking at John Duran, he was their number one target for a striker, and that didn't come off, so they bought Nicholas Füllkrug. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever in terms of, and that doesn't mean that Füllkrug's a bad player. It's just completely and utterly different profiles in terms of what you're trying to achieve from those two players. It baffles me when, clubs have a list of players they want to sign. You're like, yeah, okay, understand. And then the fourth person on that is just someone completely and utterly stylistically different. It makes zero sense. And I think that whilst you can look at someone like a Crescencio Somerville, who I think is going to be a massive success, you've got to play to some of these strengths. And it just didn't feel like any of these players were cut out for a Lopetegui system. Now, maybe they will do better under Graham Potter. To be honest, I think they will, because I think it would be very difficult to do much worse. But I think there's no doubt that at this point in the season, West Ham deserve their place in this list.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to move on to number 2 and move across London. A team that West Ham don't like very much is Tottenham. Now, I'm not putting this at number 1, as I think a lot of people might expect, mainly because I think that the injury problems are so bad that it's almost impossible for this team to reach the levels that everyone would have expected coming into the season. And I do have to consider here that the one thing that Tottenham really crave and need is a trophy, and they kind of had their foot one step at Wembley. Like, they're winning an EFL Cup semi-final here. And I'm not saying that they'll even make the final, that they'll win the final, but they are on the right path to actually winning a trophy. So they've done that with a depleted squad. And I've got to take that into account here, because it's not totally disappointing. If they make a cup final, then it's not totally disappointing this season. But I can't sit here and pretend this isn't a huge problem to have lost 12 matches out of 22 in the Premier League.
And be currently the lowest ranked London side in the Premier League, considering that we just talked about West Ham having a disappointing season.
Incredible, especially when your team has actually scored 45 goals. Liverpool are the only team in the Premier League to have scored more goals than Tottenham, yet Spurs are 15th. That has to point towards
it's just they're conceding too many.
But they're not even conceding that many. It's kind of like just that they mismanage games. Their goals against column isn't great, but it's not like the worst in the league. So it just tells me that, in terms of the tactical approaches to games, not even as full games, but as segments of games from Ange, is alarming, and that he's not learning as the season wears on. Obviously, when you have a team that is depleted and you're having to call on youngsters that haven't got such experience and stuff, you've got to be a bit more careful. Sometimes you've got to just build a wall and just go with it. Go with the low block and hope you can see it out. But Tottenham don't do it. Tottenham don't do that enough.
I would say this, just on that point, and I think it's interesting that one, Ange trying to be more defensive at the weekend, played a 3 at the back, and Spurs at absolute 6s and 7s at the back, right? So that is something just to consider. But just on top of that, there has been, and shout out and credit to John McKenzie on this one from Tifo Football and The Athletic. He put a thing up today, a thread that I read all of, that was basically about how Tottenham are using their fullbacks differently at the moment, and they're far, far more reserved than they ever have been under Ange because of what's going on elsewhere. So I don't think that there's no adaptability there. And it actually is one of those things that gets thrown at the wall a lot. It's just that Spurs have just been quite bad. I think it's generally the level that we're at now. And it's not just all, this is that, and this is the reason, and this is the reason, and Ange doesn't make any concessions. He has been making some concessions in how they've set up. They're just not very good at doing anything that isn't going absolutely full-blown, backs to the wall, kind of at it. And I feel like that's potentially a problem. But, this injury list is absurd.
Yeah, and I do have sympathy for him on that. And he's exposed the truth around the lack of depth. The need for new players has been called out by him, and he has been harmed by injuries. And so far, the board haven't done anything to bring in new players. But Spurs fans out there are saying, well, he can't take no blame for these injuries.
No, he absolutely can. Like, he has to take some blame.
He has to take blame because clearly there's something going wrong. And partly we know that some of these players weren't fully ready to be returned to the starting lineup. We saw what happened with Romero and Van der Ven, who have, just not been seen regularly enough. Those two have played together 7 times so far this season. Like, that is obviously a big part of this problem. But equally, the number of hamstring problems. Today it's been announced that Bissouma has got a hamstring injury. That is the 10th hamstring injury that Tottenham players have suffered so far this season. And this is just a repeat problem. And so Spurs fans tearing their hair out here at the injuries, also at their way that their team play. Because yes, it can be exciting and it can be fun, but they can also be so exposed. They have every reason to believe that their team should still be doing as well as a Bournemouth or a Brighton or even a Newcastle. Yet they're 10 points off the pace here. It is a hugely disappointing season, and the frustrations are obviously there for everyone to see and hear because they're calling out Daniel Levy. They're saying they want him gone. You're seeing the players after the Everton defeat, standing in front of the fans. They're kind of apologising. They're kind of showing them we understand, but they're all it's all a bit fractious. And I find it really difficult. When I was watching that scene and Sonny goes over to them and he's kind of apologising and Maddison's there saying, come on, and Porro's let's stick together. I was like, wouldn't it be amazing right now if that whole away section just fully got behind those players and just started chanting Tottenham? Wouldn't it be great? But it's so hard to do.
But it is hard to do that. You and I have both been in that situation where you're frustrated by performance. And look, that's a long way, obviously, London to Liverpool. We've travelled up there. And it's not, I think there is an element of that where if they'd gone up and they'd played Liverpool and they'd been played off the park and the players came over to apologise, I think there would be an acceptance. This is an Everton side, and now I've said this on a couple of shows now, but this is an Everton side that hadn't scored in 9 of the 11 games before that, and they were 3-0 up at half-time. There can be no excuses for that. I've seen kind of litters of puppies that have had more teeth than this Everton side in recent weeks, and yet they found a way to score 3 times against this Spurs defence in the first half. They were absolutely abysmal defensively, and to be honest, 3-0 might have flattered them a little bit. Kinski did okay, and there were a couple of big chances missed at that time as well. So you can absolutely understand why people would be seething. We've all been there. It's hard to rally at that point. You're just like, what on earth was that? This was the one where the start of a 4-game run where we expected Spurs to kind of come out fighting. Yes, the injury problems haven't abated 100%, but you look at these 4 games that they've got coming up in front of them, including games obviously in the Europa League, and thinking, okay, maybe we can utilise that and move forward. And yet it's been really, really tricky. They've now lost another game and those frustrations are boiling over. I can understand why people are angry.
Yeah, totally. But whichever way you look at it, extremely disappointing. I don't think the most disappointing, because I think the most disappointing team in the Premier League, perhaps apart from Man United, is across the city at Manchester City. I find it incredible that they're having to spend into the hundreds of millions of pounds halfway through a season in order to rescue their season. When we were talking about winning the transfer window, we were talking about Man City and the need to actually do this. And to be fair, a lot of the stuff we talked about then in them needing to do, and even some of the specific targets that they should go for, they've actually gone and done. But the fragilities still exist around this team. They've just beaten Ipswich 6-0, but I can't be fully sure about whether they've turned a corner at this stage. I'm sure they are starting to, but it's just so disappointing. I mean, I think they will go on to have a strong end to the season, but that's not really the point of this episode. I'm looking at disappointing campaigns up to now. Who has failed to live up to past expectations and successes? And Man City are right there. To be 12 points behind Liverpool after 22 games is unfathomable. And for Liverpool to still have a game in hand on them. Nobody would have predicted that. Man United are 12 points back from Man City. If you just said to a Man United fan, look, after 22 games, you're still going to be 12 points behind Man City. They'd be like, yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, that's the way things are going. If you said to a Man City fan, you're going to be 12 points off of Liverpool over halfway through the season, there'd be no chance. There's no way that we'll be that bad. Well, you are. So you actually have fallen away as much as Man United would have expected to, which I find actually really interesting. Now, I've spent a lot of time this season among like friendship groups on WhatsApp and people messaging me on like Instagram, defending Pep Guardiola because people are loving to dig him out now as a fraud because he cannot coach a team towards titles and that he has to spend money. He has to buy players. He doesn't know any other way. He can't do it. And I'm finding it harder and harder to defend him, especially as they're now going out and doing it.
Well, there isn't necessarily it's not necessarily about having to, and they are going out and spending money, and that's not to take away from that, right? And that exists. That's a thing. That's a fact. But also, I would probably put into the argument that there's sort of no players to coach, right? Like, it's not like you can be like, well, Gundogan, I need you to run more. I need more legs in this midfield. They don't exist. Those legs aren't there. You can't teach Kyle Walker was an excellent right back. He's no longer a top level right back. You can't coach that into him. His legs have gone, right? And I suppose that's the difference that we're kind of talking about here, in that it's not necessarily that the players who have been in there have lacked the technical ability to pull things off. Is that they look absolutely abysmal when it comes to doing anything physically. And that's why Man City have been so easy to kind of beat across the course of the season. But just to kind of underline this, at the start of the season, I've just pulled up the Opta supercomputer, right, from the start of the season. I'll read you. It had Manchester City predicted as finishing first. It said they had an 82.2% chance of winning the league and a 99.9% chance of finishing in the top four. City are currently fifth. Now, they might finish in the top four, but it was a 99.5% chance they were going to finish in the top three. And I still think that might be a stretch right at this point. That is wild. And yes, obviously that can't take into account the fact that Rodri has got injured. But the idea that Rodri was the only load-bearing wall in this entire Manchester City setup is potentially one, poor squad planning, right? And you can't just have one player where everything revolves around them and everything falls apart. I have more sympathy in some ways with Spurs than I do with City, in that obviously with Spurs, it's sort of like 11 players out at the moment. You're looking at City and thinking, well, there still should be the bones of something that works in this team, even if you're having to dig a little bit deeper in positions that you don't need. And that's, I think, where this one comes to fruition. And whilst I maybe would disagree that they're having a more disappointing season than Spurs, I can understand why you put them here from those kind of numbers.
Exactly, yeah. And if you look at like the latest projections from the supercomputer, Man City are now projected to finish fourth, but on the same points as Aston Villa. That's how like tight this is going to be as we get towards the end of the season. Now, I still think there's a case like if Man City do still bring in a couple more players, which they're going to try and do, if they get that central midfielder, which they need and will probably get, then there's probably a chance that they can catch Arsenal and even come second. But it's going to take a hell of a run and a run of results that has shown no signs of coming so far this season. So let's just assume that they squeeze into the Champions League places. It's not really good enough. Now, City fans will accept that they can't win the league every season forever. Like, we all know that football turns in cycles, but what they can't accept, surely, is that the team as a whole just drop off so far at the same time. And I think that the one thing that has saved part of their reputation and why they haven't had more stick this season is because it's being highlighted week after week that Man United and Tottenham are in such disastrous spells. And because City haven't sunk as far as being in the bottom half of the division, it's not been quite as bad. But when you consider where they started off in terms of expectations, that they were expected to win the league, it's as bad and as significant as Man United being in 13th right now, as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, I think the most disappointing team so far this season has been Manchester City.
Okay. All right. Well, there we have it. There's your three from the Premier League. After the break, I'm going to take us over to Europe. Don't go anywhere.
Okay, mate, you've heard what I had to say about the Premier League. I've already told you that Man United are the most disappointing team in the world, but yet Man City seemingly have a challenge that they're posing to them in that front. I'll let you carry this conversation on into continental Europe.
So I think that there is an argument that Borussia Dortmund are the most underwhelming team in world football right now, considering how their season has gone. But I don't want to talk about them right now because we're doing an entire episode about them on The Truth on Friday. So there's going to be a whole thing looking at Borussia Dortmund's campaign and where it's all gone wrong and how things are falling apart there. So I think...
So them and Man United, are they on their own planet right now?
I think so. I've got three that I want to talk about in depth, but just a couple of honourable mentions. I wanted to just quickly touch on Rennes, who the only reason they're not in this list properly is because they had such a heavy turnover in the summer. But Rennes brought in like 10 players in the summer, and there were some very, very interesting additions in there, and yet they find themselves in a relegation scrap in Liga, which is kind of just absolutely mad in so many ways. They brought in Jorge Sampaoli in the summer, who was supposed to be the man to turn things around. Now, obviously, last season wasn't great. They finished 10th under Julien Stéphan. But you think back, 22-23, Rennes finished 4th. 21-22, Rennes finished 4th. 2021, Rennes finished 6th. 19-20, Rennes finished 3rd. So they've gone through a really good spell. And look, a lot of the players have moved on from that kind of cycle. But equally, I still thought that with the amount that they turned over in the summer, with Sampaoli coming in, it really was going to turn things around mid-season. They just really haven't felt like they have done so. So, yeah, I just wanted to shout them out. And the other two teams that I thought probably could have been in this list but haven't ended up in it are Milan and Juventus for different reasons. One, Milan have just won a trophy. So whilst the Supercoppa maybe doesn't carry the same prestige as a lot of other trophies, they still have just gone and won something. So there is something to defend from that Milan perspective. And they've also had some big wins. Obviously, the win in the derby over Inter, the win at the Bernabeu against Real Madrid. There have still been kind of high points in this season, but they have been, I think, on the whole, pretty disappointing. And Juve still are unbeaten, which is just really bizarre in Serie A. But I thought they were going to be in a title race, and they're very much not on that pace. There's a lot going on at Juve, a lot of renovations, so I've left them off. But I did think in many ways that they probably could have snuck into this list.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm going to start relatively close to home with Real Betis, who have been dreadful, to be perfectly honest with you. Last season, Betis finished 7th. They got into the Conference League. They were scrapping out for Champions League places for a long part of the season and then into the Europa League places, and they actually finished 7th. And I thought, you know what? That might not be the end of the world. Betis can have a real go at the Conference League, and they should be able to utilize this squad in order to move forward. Now, Betis sold a lot of players last summer as well, and they made a lot of money, right? They made sort of 50 odd million euros over the course of the summer. They reinvested about 20 million euros of that, but it was it felt like a pretty stable place. Betis is always a little bit mad. Like they never really changes. The kind of soul of the club is just a little bit mad. But I thought with Pellegrini in there and some of the players coming in, the return of Giovanni Lo Celso, who has been quite good, pairing him up with Isco, they managed to bring in Diego Llorente and make that Marc Roca deal permanent. Perrault came in from Southampton to play at fullback. And I was just sort of looking at it and thinking, okay, this is all pretty smart. Vitor Roque comes in to be the number 9 and sort of lead the line to take away from that kind of old era of Willian José and obviously Borja Iglesias. You're thinking, okay, right, there's some freshness about this squad. Let's get into it. Let's get stuck into it. But there has been nothing to cling on to from a better perspective. They're currently 12th in La Liga. They're behind Sevilla, who are having a dreadful season of their own. But I think that's been expected. They're trying to build back up from a real low point, Sevilla. And suddenly you get to Betis and you're like, well, this was meant to be your moment. You've seized the initiative in the city from your far more successful rivals in terms of trophy, but you are in many ways the kind of people's club of the city. And it's been great over the last few years and seeing things happen, watching the Copa del Rey win, it felt like something was building. And yet, you kind of look at them in La Liga, the results just keep spiraling out of control and they keep getting worse at this point. I think they're 1 win in 6, and that was in the Copa del Rey. Very, very narrow win over Huesca, who play in the second tier. That's all that Betis fans have had to cheer for the last sort of month or so. It's been really, really disheartening across the course of it. And then you come to this Conference League. Betis currently 15th in the Conference League. Now, they're going to be okay in terms of they will get into the knockout stages, but I have no faith that this side are going to be able to sort this out in the second part of the season. And that's, I think, maybe what separates them from some of the teams we've talked about. I don't think this is going to get much better. I think this is where Betis are this season. I don't think this is going to change. Just to kind of take you through this, some of the teams that Betis are below in the Conference League table include Switzerland's Lugano, include Cercle Bruges, they're not even the biggest club in Bruges, Jagiellonia Białystok of Poland, Shamrock Rovers of the Republic of Ireland, Apoel Nicosia of Cyprus, Paphos of Cyprus, Panathinaikos, who, to be fair, are a big club, Olimpia Ljubljana from Slovenia. It's just been so frustrating from their perspective. And I think when you look at it and you look at what they've put together in this competition, some of the results, some of the performances have been absolutely diabolical. And considering the squad that they have, I think this was the moment that you thought, okay, can they now step up? Can they move forward? Can they go to a competition that has, maybe 2 teams in it who you'd say are comfortably better than Real Betis on paper? And those 2 teams are obviously Chelsea and probably Fiorentina. But you maybe could make a case for Vitória Guimarães. Fine. But, you're in the top 4 in terms of the seeds in this competition. When you went into this at the top, you look at that and you think, okay, that's where you're at. They've lost to Mlada Boleslav. They've just had an absolutely dreadful campaign across the entire set of it. And it's been so difficult watching it and seeing where they get to and seeing how they're going to play this out. But, you come to this playoff round that they've now qualified for and you're thinking they might get through the playoff round. But there is no way that when they meet anybody of any real quality or substance, Betis are going to stand up and deliver, because it just hasn't been that way all season long. And I'm just so frustrated watching them week in, week out.
Well, what about once they get Anthony? That'll help, won't it?
Yeah, I mean, that might have been a reason to put them in here and alone, right? But I would say this, though, right, for Anthony. Betis are a club who are mostly ridiculous and occasionally sublime. And so is Anthony. He fits like a glove. He's going to frustrate and delight the Via Marine. I think the pressure off him might help. I just wonder if the fact that he has basically been made into a meme in English football is going to follow him now for the rest of his career. I hope that it doesn't, and I hope that he gets that fresh start, and maybe he does start to show some signs of life again. Definitely was a player who could do some things when he left Ajax, even when he joined Manchester United for the first couple of weeks, right? And then that's all just been beaten out of him. You kind of look at the way that it's gone. I hope that he's able to regain some confidence, but yeah, it's just been very poor for Betis. And
yeah, it's tough.
I don't see Anthony being the guy.
He's like genuinely like one of the biggest Premier League flops of all time when you consider like the price tag on him. Yeah, it's like to go and join a team that are. I didn't realise Betis was this bad that you were going to include them in this conversation, but this is alarming.
Watching them is honestly, like, week in, week out, is genuinely quite painful at times. Like it's like they're finding ways to lose games. Like they're coming up with them.
He's just literally spent the last 2 years dealing with that at United.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be less kind of memeing of him.
There will be, yeah. Sorry, this wasn't supposed to turn into an Anthony conversation, but that's all I could think about as you were reeling off, like the sort of environment he's putting himself into.
Yeah, 100%. Right, let's go on to number 2. And number 2 for me is RB Leipzig, who have been a fundamental disappointment, I think, across the entire board. At the start of the season, I was looking at this Leipzig side, the squad, the business they did in the summer. Yes, obviously they lost Dani Olmo and they lost Mohamed Simikan, who were the two big ones to leave the club. But they replaced them, I thought, quite well. And they already had quite a lot of clever centre attacking midfielders. Xavi Simons came back. That was a big moment for the club. Artur Vermeeren came in and you saw that and you were like, oh, okay, let's see how that one plays out. Antonio Nusa came in from Club Brugge and you're like, okay, right, that's a good window. And they bring in Lucharel Geertruida, who was excellent at Feyenoord, to basically slot into the exact Simikan role. Okay, so they're on a good footing from last season. They've qualified for the Champions League. They ended up, I think, 7 points behind Bayern last season, but they were very much, there and thereabouts, and they were impressive in spells last season. You think about Marco Rose in charge there, a native of the city who was pretty beloved by the fan base, and you're thinking, stable, this could be a year. And I said it at the start of the year that I thought that Leipzig would be in contention for the Bundesliga title, and I thought that there was a chance that this side went deep in the Champions League. Well, 6 months on, they're out of the Bundesliga title race. I think it's probably safe to say at this point, and they are definitely out of the Champions League. Mathematically, they cannot qualify for the playoff rounds. And in a season where things have got, the front two in the Bundesliga have kind of run away with it, right? They're setting a pretty ferocious pace and they deserve credit, Bayern and Leverkusen. But, you're looking at beneath that, this Eintracht side have been excellent with Marmoush and Ekitike up top, but equally you wouldn't be looking at it and thinking it's an Eintracht vintage. Stuttgart have been, they started the season quite badly. They've dragged themselves back into contention. And these are the teams that the Leipzig are now competing with. They're already 14 points behind Bayern. There is no way they are making that gap up. And they're already 10 points behind Leverkusen. It's really, really disappointing considering the depth, I think, of this squad. And, you talk about the players that come in and out, right? But actually, when you kind of work your way through the Leipzig squad, you think about a couple of the players who really kind of set the world on notice in the Euros in the summer. And I'm looking at the Austrian players in particular, because Christoph Baumgartner was absolutely sensational for Austria during those Euros. Nicolas Seewald did a really good job. I really like Artur Vermeeren. There should be so much to dig into. And there's, it's not just a young squad. And Leipzig have had this problem in years gone by, right? Where they brought in so many good youth products that they weren't able to actually kick on and have that experience. That isn't the case anymore. They've got seasoned German internationals like David Raum in here. They have Willi Orban and Galassi, the Hungarians, who kind of anchor the back line. They have the likes of Kevin Campbell in there, who's been there for absolute donkeys. Klosterman, another international. Yusuf Poulsen coming in here, and he's someone who's been with this club for such a long time. You're looking at this and thinking, right, they have a good blend of youth and experience. They've got two of the most exciting strikers, I think, in world football, in Lois Penda and Benjamin Šeško. They scored 38 goals between them in the Bundesliga last season. This season, they've got 14 and we're over halfway. The drop-off has been so noticeable and it just hasn't clicked whatsoever. I've just been really, really frustrated watching them. And to be honest, considering what happened at the weekend where they were 3-0 up against Bochum and they threw it away, ended up drawing 3-3, I don't know how much longer Marco Rose has got left. He survived, one of the kind of hot seat moments in December and kind of clawed it back and got a few wins and managed to sort of set himself back in the role. But again, it just looks like everything's falling apart. And the fact that Šeško and Openda both got sent off at the weekend probably doesn't say that it's that much of a happy camp right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. This is definitely one of the more surprising ones for me. I just don't expect Leipzig to do this. Even when they started going through the first few results in the Champions League, I'm like waiting for the spark that turns it all around, because they have such a structure to them and such an approach to the game that you just feel like, I don't know, failure is the right word to use, but we'll use it for now. Failure is not even an option, because they have a built-in system that just works. And there's no fundamental reason. They've got goals in the team. They've got a boss that knows what he's talking about in the league. It just doesn't make sense that they've actually been this bad.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's just one of those things that's almost inexplicable. And I can't work out exactly what's going wrong at Leipzig as well, which when you look at a team, you're like, okay, I understand where that's coming from. I understand the capacity that you're coming from there to sort things out. And instead, it's just got so much worse. And that's a really hard thing, I think, to shake at this point. Maybe it should have been one, to be honest, considering what we've all just said. They might have actually gone above this team. But the team I had at one was Roma, who I think have had a campaign to forget across the whole of it. Now, the reason I had Roma in here is because Roma spent 100 million euros on players in the summer. They really, really went for it. They spent 30 million on Artem Dovbyk. They spent 25 million on Matthias Sula. They spent 23 million on Enzo Lefebvre. He's already been shipped out to Sunderland on loan. They brought in Angelino. They brought in Samuel Dahl. And you just kind of looked at it and thought, okay. Then they went into the free agent market and they went, all right, we'll get some experience in. We'll get in Mario Hermoso from Atleti. We'll bring in Mats Hummels, who was probably Borussia Dortmund's standout defender in the Champions League final. They get a loan of Alexis Salamakers, who's been excellent, actually, from Milan. They bring in Manu Kone, who's a brilliant midfielder on loan from Borussia Mönchengladbach with an option to buy. And you're thinking, right, okay, things are sorted. And then the entire thing blows up. And they sack De Rossi within 6 weeks. The board go mad. The fans absolutely hate this. They go mental. They start boycotting games. They start blaming players. Lorenzo Pellegrini, who's the Roma captain, gets a full fist of the blame from the ultras about the fact that De Rossi is sacked. They panic. They bring in Ivan Juric, who is a good Serie A manager, but a defensive Serie A manager and who wasn't suited to this squad. And then they have to go nuclear and they bring in Claudio Ranieri. And let's give some credit to the Tinker Man. He really has started to turn things around a little bit in the last couple of weeks. But considering where Roma were and considering the excitement that was around them at the end of last season with De Rossi and the fact that he was able to take over from Mourinho, the fact that they won a European trophy not very long ago and they got to the final of another one the year after, it looked like everything was moving in the right direction for Roma for the first time in quite some time, I think it's fair to say. And instead, we've had this season where, yes, okay, things have got a little bit better recently, but they're still well off the pace in terms of challenging for a Champions League spot, which was definitely the aim. You look at where they are in the Europa League, which is a competition that, again, they should have been looking to go and make their mark on. They're stuck in the middle of it in 14th behind the likes of Bodo Glimt and Steaua Bucharest. You know, even United and Tottenham are ahead of Roma in the Europa League, which is something considering the season they're having. And to make things worse for them, Lazio currently sit top of that table as well, just to really rub it in for Roma fans. So I think that considering all of that, with all of what happened in it, there are extenuating circumstances. But none of that takes away from the disappointment, I think. At the start of this season, I think Roma would have been looking at this year, looking at the spend they made. They brought in the top scorer from La Liga in Artem Dovbyk. You would have been thinking, okay, Roma want here to challenge for a Champions League spot and they want to have a good go at the Europa League. And you look at the players that left, right, last year, and it's not loads of players who were, you know, picking up loads and loads of minutes. They didn't make all that much money back from a lot of these players because they weren't in the form that you'd expect them to be in order to sell them. Right, they sell Houssem Aouar, who did okay when he moved to Roma, to Al Ittihad. That's kind of it. He's the only one here you're looking at and thinking, regular appearance. Obviously, the Lukaku loan ended, and that was probably frustrating, and they lost Tammy Abraham to Milan on loan. But with when you kind of think about that in the terms that Dovbik's come in to be the guy, be the number 9, both of those things are acceptable, right? Both of those things are reasonable. And I think given all of that, and given that it wasn't like they had to sell big to spend big, given that they spent 100 million euros, what's happened at Roma this season is amongst the biggest disappointments, I think, in world football, and made more so by the fact that when things are good at Roma, it's one of the best places to watch football, to play football in the world, I think.
Yeah, I think that while in terms of the expectation levels that were built, like it's fair. I think it's tight. I still might put Leipzig ahead of them.
Yeah, okay, it's fair.
But, you know, when you take individual losses as well, like losing to Como, losing to Hellas Verona, like those are the sort of matches that like really underpin how badly this has gone.
I think the thing that's made me put them top is how badly they've dealt with setbacks. Like the decision to sack De Rossi and alienate the entire fan base. So the decision to then appoint Juric and him come in and be like, I don't know how to play football with this team. The decision, that they've made time and time again to spend that much money on Enzo Lefebvre and 6 months later be loaning him off to Sunderland. Like, that is bad from everyone involved. If you spend 30 million euros on a player, you work out how to get him into that side. Right? You work out how to make that a success. And I think that the fact that they've not been able to do that is the thing that frustrates me the most with Roma this season.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are signs of recovery here. Yeah. They're unbeaten in 6 domestically, so like that's a good sign. They won.
Again, it's not to say that they won't go on, like you said with City. It's not to say that they won't go on and do good things this season. And look, if they can get rolling, then they have a shot at that Europa League. I think, considering that there feels like a lot of teams on a similar kind of even keel when it comes to the top tier, but like what we've seen so far has just been so disheartening. I think maybe I'm emotionally attached to this as well, which has probably ramped it up.
That ride my shirt off, mate.
Yeah, well, perhaps. Right, with that, I think it's probably time for us to call it a day. So it was left for me to do. Say thank you very much to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC. Thank you so much for listening as ever. Dean and I will be back tomorrow with the return of Champions League Takeaway, the first one of 2025. So make sure you're tuned in. It will be released a couple of hours after those Champions League games end on Wednesday. So we'll have that with you as soon as we can. But for now, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you very shortly. Take it easy, gang. Peace.